with one of the chef folks, and it was automation scientist, and then with a cool chef logo. I was like, I like that one too.
I like their swag. It's one of my favorite little workout T-shirts.
That's a great one.
Well, I was trying to figure out if the value of the shirt goes up now that the deal's announced,
Totally.
or it does. So I
Yeah.
should eBay this.
Yeah. See what you can
Awesome.
get. Collector's item.
Cool. We're live. You settled over there? You ready to do this?
I am ready.
All right. I got to go through my intro spiel, so
Okay.
we'll kick things off. Welcome to M&A Science Live. Putting together companies is complicated, and taking them apart is even more complicated. We take lessons from real practitioners and enable them through our Deal Room platform. In this podcast series, we interview leading M&A practitioners to learn lessons from their experience. Learning proven techniques is key to optimizing your M&A practice. If you're interested in learning more, connect with us at our networking events and access our educational resources at mascience.com. We also have a happy hour next Wednesday, so you can find more information about that on the website as well. Jeremy will probably be there. We'll make him join.
Definitely.
I'm your host, Kisan Patel, CEO and founder of Deal Room. I spent 10 years as an M&A advisor, and after seeing a slew of many industry-wide challenges, in 2012, I decided to pursue the dream to build the greatest software to manage M&A. Today, I'm here with Jeremy Siegel, Senior Vice President of Corporate Development at Progress. Jeremy's a corporate development executive with 20 plus years of experience in the technology industry, focused on M&A, strategic planning, joint ventures, divestitures, international expansion, and strategic partnerships. He's led all aspects of 35 plus acquisitions, divestitures, and strategic investments with an aggregate value exceeding $8 billion. I think a little bit more with the recently announced deal. So maybe 8.
Yeah, I know I have to change that. Yeah.
Today, we're going to discuss how to build and align a corporate development team with multiple mandates. For example, corporate ventures, joint venture, strategic partnerships. A characteristic of all corporate development teams is that each is completely different from each other. Can you share a view of your responsibilities and your specific role?
Sure, and thank you. I think it was great to hear that history of what I've done, and it just makes me feel really old. But yeah, so you're right. Every corporate development function is different, and it's been different for me from my days at Akamai to my years at Logmein to even at Progress. And I would say that at Progress, we are executing on more of a total growth M&A strategy. So Progress is a great company, has been around for over 35 years, and is very focused on looking for assets that have sufficient scale that we can bring into our platform and leverage the strengths that we've built over those 35 years, including operational efficiency, strength in being able to sell to a broader base of customers. And so it's different than in the past where I was more focused on technology tuck-ins and looking for technology that I could bolt on to different product suites of products that we had at Logmein. So it's true, each corporate development leader probably has a different mandate as to what its focus is. And for us, it's really finding assets that have the scale that can make an immediate impact on the business, and where we can implement some of our strengths from an operational efficiency standpoint to make them work with our business model.
Nice. So what do you do?
so I spend a lot of time working with the leaders in the company to really understand each of the different businesses. The company today is broken out into 3 core business units, and so I spend a lot of time working with each of them to really understand the strategy of those businesses, but also to understand the more macro company M&A strategy as well, and where we're focused. And taking that and then really understanding for Progress, understanding the entire infrastructure software ecosystem. And as part of that, DevOps is a key component of that. And really spending a lot of time understanding who are the players in the different spaces, what are the key trends in those different spaces, spaces? How could it fit within Progress in those respective spaces? And then it's really around sort of going out there and sourcing these opportunities. And so this is where, I know a big part of today's theme is around relationships and building relationships. And for me, that's been a critical part of my success in doing corporate development for as long as I have. It's about building those relationships, not just with the companies that are the target companies that you want to have dialogue with, but it's having relationships with the venture capital and private equity communities that are going to provide a source of those opportunities as well, and making sure that they understand what our priorities are. And then it's also having relationships in the investment banking community. Something I learned early on in my career was, what I didn't want to have happen was my CEO come into my office and say, Jeremy, how come we didn't look at that asset? I just heard that company X bought it. So it's super important for me to have really good relationships with a broad set of the investment banking community as well, so that as they have mandates around different deals, they can say, oh, well, I got to reach out to Jeremy because I know that this is something that could fit into a possible interesting area for them. And I think that being able to maintain those relationships and build those relationships over this extended period of time has been super helpful to me. And I think for me, it's not just about thinking about short term, what should we be doing, but it's really about thinking about that longer term M&A chessboard, and really thinking about, well, what could be some of the moves we want to do in 2021, 2022. So while we certainly get involved in a lot of the tactical stuff and executing on the deals that are right in front of us, it's also important to be constantly building that pipeline for the next year and the year after that, and so on and so forth, so that you can have that constant deal flow. And then it boils down to making sure that you can execute on these transactions well, from the diligence process to the negotiation process to the integration process, which are all so critical. And it's really important to put extra emphasis in all those different phases of the M&A process. So that's a lot. So I get to do a lot of fun things. I mean, when I go and talk to my alma mater, Bowdoin College, and I tell them about all the fun things I do, I just can't help but get excited because it's a great role, and we get to do a lot of really cool things, and it's high impact for the business, and it's just great.
It's amazing that you're able to do that all off the golf course.
I wish I had more time on the golf course, and trust me, my golf game will show you that I don't have a lot of time on the golf course.
Share with me how you ensure that you have an authentic and genuine relationship through the process of initial prospecting and throughout the initial course of a transaction.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think for me, it's not about like reaching out and saying, "Hey, we're interested in buying you. What do you think?" It's really about sort of building that trust, building that interest in wanting to be more engaged with each other. And that takes time. I have a great example of a deal that I did at LogMeIn where I met this company when they were in their early stages, and we just sort of kept the dialogue open. I introduced them to other people within the company on the technology and product side. They got more familiar with this company and the product that it was building. And once they had gotten to some level of scale, we had that relationship already in place. So we were in a position to be able to do that acquisition and be able to do that acquisition proactively as opposed to reactively, say, in an auction process. And I think that it's important for me to, with all the CEOs and all the other folks that I interact with at companies, is to build that trust and to educate them more on Progress too, and get them or the company that I'm working for, whether it's Progress or LogMeIn in the past or Akamai, and getting them excited about, wow, think about the things I could do at Progress that I can't do on my own, or that if I want to do on my own, I'm going to need to raise a lot more capital to do it. It's going to take me a lot more time to do it. I'm going to have to take on significant more dilution to do it. This Progress thing is a little bit more interesting. And then what I do is I try to get them introduced to more folks within the Progress family. So having them talk to the GM of a business unit, having them talk to folks on the product side. One of the best things for me is when you see product folks talking to product folks on the other side, and you can just tell right away if there's a vision match there, because they just get so giddy and they could just go on for hours and hours talking about products, talking about technology. And it's building those relationships, not just me, but the entire team of folks that will be involved in an acquisition. And over the course of the time, those conversations evolve, and you can then start to segue into, well, maybe there's more that we should be doing together. And those are usually the points where the target companies are more receptive to it. Or if the target company is at sort of that inflection point, they know they have the relationship with me, and they can reach out to me and leverage that relationship to potentially avoid having to go through a long process, but do a deal with us.
Now, this is really interesting because as a CEO of a company, it can be pretty daunting to get approached by a strategic acquirer. It's not this post-deal sunshine and rainbows sort of picture that you hear about. And I'm curious if you can give me an example of maybe a deal or somebody you worked with where you sort of saw this CEO go through that light up moment and saw it as a greater opportunity as opposed to just a paycheck exit.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it's funny because there are plenty of CEOs who will just instant, or their automatic reaction is, well, I'm not really interested in selling the company, so I'm not really sure why we need to talk right now. And then I try to just get them a little bit more comfortable and sort of go into the, well, let's look at maybe some ways that we can partner together and sort of take those baby steps to a bigger relationship. And we have thousands and thousands of customers. You don't, so you have access to all these customers. We have this great platform selling machine, and you're just building up a team, so we have access to that. So you start to get them more and more excited about the opportunity. And I would say, it was interesting. I was working on an acquisition at LogMeIn, and the company had just taken some initial funding. And so while the CEO of the company was actually receptive to working with us, the investor was very skeptical. And obviously, the investor had big visions of what this company could do. But the CEO, stated its case and built its case and convinced the investor that, yeah, going and working with LogMeIn makes a lot of sense, and doing that now makes a lot of sense. So it's just, again, it's part of that building the relationship, building the trust, getting the people on your side so they can build the case to people that may be the naysayers on their side as well.
Now, is it more so I have this broad view that my business can merge with your organization and have potential for greater growth, scale, faster pace? Or is it more as a CEO, my comp's going to be better because I'm going to get paid out and have some potential other additional revenues for retention?
I think it's the former, and I hope that it's the former, because that's what I want them thinking about. I want them saying, "Hey, I want to see this company succeed, and I know this company has a bigger opportunity for success and a faster opportunity for success if it becomes a part of this bigger platform." Now, certainly, in most of those cases, it works out well for the CEO as well, and hopefully a good chunk of the rest of their team as well. And that's certainly a nice piece. But for me, it's really more of making sure that they're committed to wanting to really be engaged in the business still, building that business together still, and having that partnership on a go-forward basis. I don't want them necessarily leaving on day one. And of course, that differs from some deals. And on the total growth side, where you're buying things with more scale, maybe it's not the case where you need that senior most leader. But certainly on the tuck-in side, where you're bringing in new technology, where you have no familiarity with a space, having that leadership team to help you drive that is key. And so having them committed is key.
Having a CEO that's embodied in the business, thinking about the business for greater purpose. What's your ideal method of getting a prospect on board?
I think it all boils back to what I talked about before, and sort of building that trust, and sort of having a regular dialogue, and exposing the CEO and exposing the target company to a broader set of folks within my company, and getting them more excited about our company. And
Yeah,
at
but
the same time,
how? They're not coming to you.
oh, so from a standpoint of like, how do I reach out to them?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. How do you sort of get them there and get
Yeah, no,
get
that's a great
that
point. So I
relationship
mean,
going?
well, one of the great things of having been around as long as I have been, at this point, I do have a pretty good network, and so it's usually pretty easy for me to get access to these different executives, whether it's through a connection that we have, a mutual connection that we have at a VC firm or a private equity firm, or just someone that we know mutually where I can easily leverage a contact that I have to get a connection. I'd prefer to have more of that warm connection than just doing the sort of cold call and just reaching out of the blue. But one of the benefits for having done this as long as I have is I usually don't need to do that out of the blue cold call, which can be tougher. And that's sometimes where you get that more initial adverse reaction to why is this guy calling? And I talk about the fact that while my mandate is on the M&A side, I work very closely with the company in helping to identify strategic partnership opportunities as well. So if this is not an M&A opportunity, there could be a great opportunity from a partnership standpoint, and that can be a great way to start a relationship.
How does that differ 20 plus years ago when you didn't have this expansive network to lean on?
That's a great question. 20 plus years ago, I was doing this at Akamai, and it was a lot more of reaching out and figuring out how could I get to those people, and it was building those relationships. It was building those relationships with the VCs. I'd say when I started a corporate venture fund at Akamai, that was a great vehicle for me to get access to a great number of companies because I built this phenomenal network of venture capitalist folks, and I learned so much more about the kinds of companies that were in their portfolio that may not have been on my radar if I didn't have those relationships, if we weren't doing that corporate venture piece. So it was a great way for me to sort of build that initial network and build and just build more relationships.
Your approach to nurturing relationships sounds very similar to my own approach for passive recruiting. And is it very similar, or are there some differences?
From a passive recruiting standpoint?
Yeah, you're sort of, hey, just getting to know somebody. I may reach out to you even and ask for advice, but just building that relationship over time. Then I may say, hey, Jeremy, I want to come join your team or something like that.
Yeah, it's a great point, and there probably are real similarities there because it is all about sort of just getting to know each other, and it's sort of interesting. And having just gone through the chef experience where we had to do the entire process virtually, it makes you appreciate, you know, figuring out how to build those relationships. And certainly with chef, we had to get a little bit more creative because it wasn't as if I was able to fly to Seattle to sit down with their CEO face to face. So
You didn't do any face to face with them?
a lot of face to face on Zoom, but yeah,
Nothing in person.
nothing in person. The whole
Uh,
transaction was done virtually. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, well, I think one of the things we benefited from on the chef transaction is that the company actually was over 60% virtual anyway. So, they were used to a more of a virtual type structure, as opposed to everyone being in the office every single day, where something like this might feel a little bit more uncomfortable. But I'd have to say it was still uncomfortable for me because being as old school as I am, I put a lot of emphasis on that, getting to know folks, going out and meeting with them face to face, having dinner with them, having drinks with them, and again, just sort of slowly building that connection.
I had a
Um,
friend in corp dev told me he can't close a deal unless he can sit across the table and look the person in the eye.
oh, a lot of people have said that, and certainly you had to deal with that challenge here. But I mean, we certainly had a lot of opportunities to look across the virtual table and look each other directly in the eye because we were always on video. Um,
So how
and
many calls is that from the beginning to end?
oh my gosh, I a lot, a lot, a lot.
Weekly? I mean, I'm sure it varies as you go through the different stages.
Yeah. Oh, plenty of calls every week. And then once you get into the diligence process, the activity picks up even more. And you've got all the different functions talking to folks on their team every single day, all over the course of the day. But yeah, we did the whole thing virtually, and we built out our entire integration plan as a virtual integration as well. So, again, old school, very used to being there day one, kicking off big rah-rah session, big party, welcoming everyone in, having face-to-face sessions with everybody. Just couldn't do that. But we still had the virtual one-on-ones, and we did try to make it as special of an experience as it possibly could be.
Did you do a virtual closing dinner?
I'm holding out on having a closing dinner face to face at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future. We'll
Tell
see.
me about tell me about how you manage the wide breadth and depth of responsibilities you have. You manage acquisitions from sourcing through integration. So how do you manage those responsibilities?
I'd say that one of the pieces is, being able to delegate and being able to build up a really good team. And for me, having good people to work with has always been key. And so I've built up the team at Progress. So I have someone who just recently joined me on the corp dev side. I have a couple folks who work closely with me who are integration specialists, one of whom has led over 80 integrations over the course of his career. So just brings a wealth of knowledge. um, I've also, and I did this starting at LogMe, and I work with a boutique firm called Bridge Street Advisors, which is a great firm that works closely to get to know the business and helps us in a lot of the sourcing, a lot of the preliminary sourcing. Because you're right, and when you're thinking about the number of companies that we're talking to, the amount of pipeline that we're building, being able to do it with a two-person team can get challenging. And so, again, sort of working closely with some great experts really helps us bring best of class abilities throughout the entire process, from sourcing all the way through to integration and having ultimately a successful acquisition.
So you're really focused on bringing in the best quality people that you can find. And I'm sure you spend a lot of time to identify and recruit those people. What's the top thing?
Mainly people that read your book. They need to have read your book, and if
The,
they've read your book, that's a good sign.
this book?
Exactly, exactly.
So that's the top thing you look for is make sure they did some research and really understand the current trends of M&A. And
Exactly. But no, on a serious note, I mean, I'm looking for folks who have experience going through the entire process, from sourcing deals to executing deals to leading a diligence process to negotiating a deal. Um, all those different pieces that are so important to the success of a deal. On the integration side, I can find people that are more specialized in that specific area. And I've been lucky to find a couple of folks that are great there, because I think that's super important. And it's important for me to find people that I know are going to be able to work well within Progress, because such a critical part of our role is working cross-functionally. And working with people in finance and working with people in engineering can be very different personalities, very different approaches, and you need to find people who are comfortable working across all these different functions, and where each of the different functions will be excited um, and want to work with me and my team. Because if they don't want to work with me and my team, my job becomes a lot harder. And so it's super important to me to find people that have that skill set, that really strong interpersonal skill set, and that have the comfort and ability to not only work cross functionally at their level or at levels below them, but also up, executive level, board of director level, because we have a lot of interaction with our board, because M&A is such a critical part of the Progress strategy. We have regular dialogue with them, and regular dialogue on a weekly basis at our exec team meetings.
where do you find these M&A unicorns? 'Cause they're not just frolicking around the neighborhood.
Well, part of it, actually, the one that I just hired, I actually met at a conference.
Okay.
And we again, but going back to the relationship piece, we hit it off at the conference. We stayed in touch over the years, and when I had an opportunity, I reached out, and he jumped on it. And I think part of it is building a reputation for executing good deals and for being highly acquisitive, and other people who want to have this role want to come work in that environment, and so it becomes an easier sell.
So you're
And
not just posting monster job posts and people are
no,
flocking from that.
no, definitely not. And I think that it's all about having fun, and I think people will recognize, in listening to me and hearing about my role, just the level of excitement and enthusiasm that I have for doing this. And at Progress, it's exciting because we have a mandate that we've talked about publicly to the street, and doubling the size of the business in 5 years, primarily through M&A. And so, a lot of pressure, but a lot of excitement too to be able to go execute on that,
Wow.
and be a key contributor to that, and hopefully
This,
build really big shareholder value.
this is great for those listening that are actually looking for their next role, because as far much as they can look at the job post, they're better off going to happy hour next week and just networking with practitioners. And
Exactly.
very cool. And I think that's the way
Uh-huh.
the industry works, because that sort of
Yeah.
helps define your expertise. And we talked a little bit about the books and that you're constantly learning.
Yeah,
And
and I think that's a great point. And in every deal that we do, we'll do a retrospective. And I'm the first one to say, even though I've done this for 20 years, that I am not perfect, and I know that there are great lessons learned on every deal and things that we could have done better on every deal. And I think that that's important. And when I came into Progress, it wasn't as if I just came in and said, I want to do it this way because this is how I've done it for the last 5 years. It was, well, how do you guys do it? Oh, that makes sense. I like that. And one of the things that was super exciting coming into Progress was just the level of experience and expertise across all the different functional areas at the team's ability to do M&A. And so it wasn't so much as if I could sit back and relax, but I had a lot more confidence in the whole process because I knew I had great people in all these different functions who really knew what to look for, how to uncover the bad things, how to ask the right questions, and that just makes my job so much easier.
that's really cool. You use retrospectives because it's very
Yeah,
much an agile thing to do. What,
exactly. Yeah.
give me an example. Give me an example of a retrospective you did and what a good takeaway was from it.
Well, I would say, well, early on, one of the big ones that I learned in a couple of the first deals that we did at Akamai, we did not have that integration function attached at the hip with me from the minute that we signed that letter of intent through the entire diligence process. And that created challenges in having a more smooth integration process. From my perspective, once I've signed an LOI, once I go into exclusivity with a company, the key person that I'm working side by side with is that integration lead. And I'm having that integration lead sitting on every single diligence meeting. And every single diligence readout session has a slide that's dedicated to what are the key things that you've learned that could have integration implications, and how do you suggest that we address them? And so by having that visibility that early in the process, as we're building out the integration plan, we're that much smarter across each of the functions. So that was certainly something that I learned early on from doing those that reflection and doing that retrospective. And I think it's super important. But over the course of the years, we've made changes, just in our approach and in how we do different things, and how to the diligence readout, and how we do a diligence readout. What are the key things we want to hear from the functional leaders when they come in and talk to us from a diligence readout standpoint? So, and again, it's just continuously in building upon, improving upon your process.
That's great. You just scored 10 points in our M&A Science deal practitioner rankings. So
Great.
I want to hear more about it, because I in the interviews I've done, I feel like this is essentially part of the evolution of developing a corp dev function, where they start off with this handoff and they build things out by their life cycle stage. And then next, there's the fabled wall that you throw your deal from diligence over for day one for integration team. And
Yeah.
90% of them, like, they want to get involved earlier so they can actually be prepared. And your view, from what you've learned, you've really brought this in. And I like the phrase you used, attached at the hip,
Mm.
because I think that is a clear resemblance of what that should be. Can you walk me through, when do you bring that integration lead in, and how do you think of them as you work through the transaction? I've talked to Carlos Sesta. We have a podcast coming out with him where he refers it to as another work stream for integration during diligence. How do
Yeah.
you sort of think about that?
Yeah. I usually I bring them in as soon as I've signed an LOI and I get to that exclusivity point, and I know that I'm going to be doing a real in-depth um, diligence review, and there's a much greater likelihood of us doing a deal. We are not a company that's just sending out LOIs for the sake of sending out LOIs. If we're signing a letter of intent and moving to that point of exclusivity, it's because we are serious to get a deal done. And if we're serious to get a deal done, I want to make sure that right from that starting point, I have that integration person working with me, telling me like what I should be thinking about, asking questions of the functional leaders that can help him or her, because I have an integration specialist who's a woman as well on my team, and really be able to sort of help them sort of devise their plans. And so it's a great point. I guess I would refer to it as a separate work stream, because they are both having separate meetings with the functional folks over the course of the diligence process to build those relationships, to help understand some of the key things that they're finding in their diligence process, and what that means as we think about integration plans. Like, we spend a lot of time with the HR team understanding what is the cultural environment, how similar of a cultural environment is this company to, excuse me, to ours, and what does that mean as we think about day one, and what are some of the in reading surveys, and what are some of the things that the employee base is excited about with their current company, and what are some of the things that they're not excited about with their current company, and how can we progress leverage that to get that team excited right when they come in to progress. And so it's super important to just give them as much visibility as possible, and minimize the surprises. And then, once we get to that day one point, uh, I'm not doing that handoff. I am part of the integration management team. I am on the integration steering committee. So when we're doing transaction, when we're in that integration phase, I'm still involved. And I think that's important too, because you don't want things to get lost from the diligence period to the integration period. Um,
Well,
so
why? How are you incentivized to stay with that deal after it closed? Because the deal guys, wipe your hands clean and move on to the next deal. And
I am incentivized because when I'm reporting to my board, as part of our business case, I'm talking about what some of the key acquisition metrics are for the deal. And so those are usually revenue related. They're usually headcount related. They're usually product deliverable related. And if we drop the ball on those, then technically I've dropped the ball. And so I am just as incented to make sure that the execution is a success as the integration lead. Now, I'm certainly not living it as much day to day once the deal's done and I've done that handoff, but I'm staying close enough to it so that I know balls are not getting dropped.
okay, so
And I've lived that where balls have gotten dropped in
you
the past. So
got hard lessons, and you have some key metrics to really define the success of the deal that ties back to your investment thesis, which is built around some synergies assumptions. Where does this integration lead come in play? Do they have any say or any input in determining those synergies, or is it
I
all
was,
up to you to sort of
I
come up
no,
with the numbers to get the deal
I,
done?
I will say that they are very vocal. They are very vocal. And when we were setting the integration metrics for Chef, my integration lead was very vocal in working with my executive champion and helping to clearly define, pushing him to set more aggressive targets, and I think that it's a great relationship, and again, similar to me being attached to the hip with my integration lead, the executive champion of the deal is spending a lot of time with him as well, and talking about the things that are most important for the success of his or her deal, and so the integration lead knows that and is going to make sure that he's driving people to help achieve those goals.
But let's define the executive champion because that varies
Yeah.
company to
Oh,
company.
sorry. Yeah. So for each deal that I do, um, I have someone on the executive team. Well, depending on the size of the deal, but typically someone on the executive team who owns that deal, who's advocating for that deal, who's banging the table and saying, "I want to do that deal. I have conviction around this deal. I will go in front of the board and tell the board I want to do this deal, and here's why," and have that same level of conviction. Because at the end of the day, my boss, our CEO, is going to look at that person and say, "Do you want to do this deal? Why do you want to do this deal?" Um, you know, my job is to make sure everything across the process from sourcing the deal all the way through goes smoothly and goes well. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's that executive champion who owns the success of that deal as well.
So when we look at that valuation model and we talked a little bit about validating those assumptions, a lot of that influence is coming from yourself, the integration lead, basically the champion of the deal, the business unit head, basically, or whoever that is,
In
uh,
finance.
and finance.
Yeah. Yes.
And then is there anybody else that may get involved? Any other
Oh,
functional leads or?
absolutely. And when we're setting assumptions around a deal, we're going to work closely with the different functional teams, particularly as it relates to assumptions that affect their part of the business. We're not going to do that in a vacuum, because the last thing you want to have happen is we make assumptions, we put it into a model, we say, all right, let's go execute on it, and then say the HR team finds out they have X and they needed Y, or the IT team finds out that they have to convert all these systems into our systems in 3 months. So there has to be a lot of collaboration across all the different functions
Very
through the
cool.
whole modeling and financial deal modeling process.
How do you make that happen? A lot of meetings using chat tools or awesome project
We
management
try
tools?
to integrate it into the diligence readouts. We'll integrate it into the diligence readouts so that it can be part of those. I've got a phenomenal finance team that puts the cycles into reaching out and working with each of the different functional areas and reviewing the key assumptions for their respective part of the model. You know, I'm really fortunate. The team that I have at Progress just phenomenal in the whole team is great, but the finance guys and particularly the guys who are building out the model are just at a different level of awesome. And I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and so there's a lot of confidence in what they're building out, and a lot of confidence in the assumptions that we're making because we're making them together with the people that the assumptions affect, as opposed to just making assumptions.
So I got to ask you, you mentioned you use investment advisors earlier. How do you vet them out?
Um, so yeah, so we use a bunch of different advisors. So we use transaction services advisors for a lot of the financial and accounting diligence. Um, depending on different deals, depending on the size of the deal, we might work with an investment banker. And again, part of it goes back to the relationships. Part of it goes back to how well do they know my business? How much time have they spent with me to understand what's important to me in my business? And that's super important. And then obviously between me and other folks on the executive team who have come from other places where we've worked with different advisors and have good relationships and have good trust with them, it helps. But I think one of for us building the skill set that we have allows us to do a lot of it on our own.
Got it. So a lot of it you're doing in-house. When you do reach out, you have some existing relationships, but then if you got to go beyond that, you're looking for their understanding of the industry and your organization. How can somebody demonstrate that? Like what's going to get your attention if I'm a guy that wants to come source your next deal?
You're going to show a good understanding of the progress business by being able to come in and say, Here's where you play. Here's where you could play. Here are some of the players that play in those areas that could be interesting targets for you." Excuse me. And for me, a lot of the investment banks will come in with the same idea. So it's when the investment banks come in with those different ideas that are more out of the box, that show that they have more of a thoughtful view of the company. That really helps.
A little strategic thinking there, and
Hmm.
maybe show you
Yeah,
some things you haven't already seen.
you may not have seen it before. Yeah.
So a critical aspect of being successful in corporate development is the relationship you have with your leadership. How do you interact with the board of directors? How do you work out the dynamics between yourself and the CEO?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that was super important to me coming to Progress was the opportunity to be part of the CEO staff here, and report directly to our CEO. Because I think it's really important, particularly at a company like Progress, where M&A and the execution of M&A is such a critical part of the overall company strategy, to be able to have that close interaction with not only the CEO, but with the entire executive team. And I think one of the things that we've done really well, um, and it worked really well through the chef process, is within our board, we have an M&A committee that we spend a bunch of time with and meet with over the course of a deal process, and just to have a regular dialogue with. And they ask good questions, and that sort of basically gets us to go focus on different pieces from a diligence standpoint to make sure we're more prepared. So then when we ultimately go in front of the broader board, you know, the M&A committee is already excited about the deal. They understand the deal at a much deeper level. We've answered the questions that they've asked and gotten them comfortable with the level of work that we've done to understand the business, with the level of work that we've done to really think about what this business will look like within progress. And I think that's super important. So from my perspective, having that M&A committee as sort of a subset of the board is a great vehicle for us. And we talk to them about our pipeline, and we get feedback from them there. And so it's just really good to have that sort of more regular cadence.
So you have essentially a sub board focused on M&A that you can have as like a preliminary vetting and start gathering some of this information and start looking at things before you have a formal review for the
Yeah,
board. Does that
yeah,
sound right?
yeah. We met with the M&A committee multiple times over the course of the chef process, to discuss different topics, to get them comfortable on understanding who the target company was, to get them comfortable on the diligence work that we did, to get them comfortable on the overall business case and what this would look like on a go-forward basis. Yeah,
Who should be in
it's
the
great.
M&A committee?
It's a great question. Someone that has a finance background to really push you on the financial model and the valuation analysis work. Ideally, someone who has experience doing deals, and can share great insights and tidbits from that. Um, you know, Potentially someone who has more of that people side, and can provide the people perspectives. I've found that to be really helpful as well. That's a super important part for me, and sort of thinking about the cultural aspects and the people aspects. It's one of the key constituents. I mean, you have the customers, you have the shareholders, you have the employees, and then you have the community, and so you want to make sure that you're addressing them all.
Got it. Um, have you ever brought up a deal that you really believed in and it got shot down, and why?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Give me an example.
Um, well, um,
I mean,
um,
I would grant any deal you wanted to do with your background and experience. So I'm curious.
no, I've had deals, certainly in my life that I was excited about, and that ultimately either there was just too much pressure because the board was just lukewarm on an opportunity, and that gave my executive team pause, and that made it harder for us to sell the case. So that certainly happened. I think it's super important for you to have the kind of, and I think having this M&A committee has been so valuable because it gives you an opportunity to state the case. And even if the board or board members are skeptical, it gives you an opportunity to explain why you want to do a deal and get them excited about it. And it's funny on Chef, when my executive champion was presenting to the M&A committee, and one of the board members' comments was, "You were just so enthusiastic and excited. I could feel the energy and the excitement that you have for this deal." I mean, it's just, and seeing that kind of conviction is huge. And not having an opportunity to sort of provide that kind of that case building, to potentially get them to think about an opportunity differently. Um, in the past has made it challenging on certain deals where they just have a more instantaneous sort of thinking of, I don't really want to do that. I don't think it makes sense for you. So,
So you got to sell.
so you got it. You do. Sometimes you do have to sell, and that's part of what we're doing. And it's part of my job. I know. I feel like part of my time is part of the time I'm acting as a psychologist. My wife's a social worker. Sometimes I feel like I'm a social worker. Sometimes I just on calls to let people vent because they're frustrated. Whatever it takes to get through a process.
Is there a threshold where you can just sign off on deals without going through the approval process?
No, it's a great question. We have in the past had sort of governance guidelines. I think for progress, given the fact that we're only doing deals that have scale, um, we're not doing small tuck-ins. I think if we were doing small tuck-ins, maybe the board wouldn't be interested in deals that are sub 10, sub $50 million purchase price. But given the size of the types of deals that we're doing, it's important for them to be engaged and involved. But I have in prior lives had it set up in a way that there was governance thresholds so that the executive team had the authority to approve smaller deals. Obviously, notifying the board, but not needing board approval.
Awesome. So you had the blank check, but not now.
Yeah, no blank check now.
Tell me a little bit about the CEO relationship because I'm curious what makes that work well. What are I guess even putting it from the lens of the CEO, what do they want from a corp dev leader? Because a lot of times that falls back on them and building the M&A function, which falls back on you. So how do you sort of, what do they look for and how do you keep that relationship healthy?
I have a great relationship with my CEO, and I think part of it is because he's so enthusiastic and excited about M&A. I mean, it's something that he's passionate about. He's led M&A in his prior life, so that can be good and that can be bad. But for the most part, that's good because he does have that. Interest in it. And I think for me, it's just having a good open cadence in understanding what's important to him and understanding what's not important to him. Because the last thing I want to do is be bringing up ideas that are just completely irrelevant. And so a lot of that goes back to understanding what's important to us as a company from an M&A standpoint, understanding what the characteristics are of a company that would be an ideal candidate versus the types of characteristics that are not. Like, I'm not going to bring to my CEO a company that's bleeding money, even if it's growing 50, 100%. That's not the kind of company that we at Progress are looking for. We are perfectly content with companies that are growing nicely, but have an incredibly sticky customer base, an incredibly loyal customer base with a high recurring revenue model, where we see opportunities for implementing our operational efficiencies. And if I see companies like that or that have fit that profile anywhere across the infrastructure software ecosystem, you know, those are the kind of conversations that my CEO is going to want to have, and he's going to be excited about that. So it's really understanding what kind of deals we want to do, and being able to have those conversations with you with my CEO. And I think it's all he appreciates also, my experience in me saying, well, I'm not sure if that's such a good idea, in pushing back and questioning different things. And he's super awesome in listening and taking a lot of my inputs and saying, hey, you know what, that makes sense, all right, we'll do that.
Awesome. So fact that
So
you're aligned on goals and you're able to sort of ask those questions, push back, and I'm sure you,
yeah, and I think it's just building it. I mean, it again, going back to the whole virtual. I started at Progress virtually. I have yet to be in the office to meet my colleagues other than through the interview process. And so, at some point it will be great to be able to just have that more casual, just walk into my boss's office or him walk into my office and just chat about different topics, talk about different trends, talk about different deals that are getting done. But right now we have to rely on Zoom for that. So
you got hired in the virtual world, you got a deal done in the virtual world. You're leaving no excuses for any other
all
corporate
right,
leader out there listening.
no need to ever go back into the office. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I do want to get back to those days because I do think that there is total value to that interpersonal aspect.
I'm sure the CEO is going to appreciate your golf game, so he's probably going to want to check that out. So, Jeremy, this last question is really important. What's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
Craziest thing I've seen in M&A. I can't go with the simple one, which would just be being able to get a whole deal done in the virtual world, because a lot of
That's
companies
not
are doing
crazy
that now.
anymore.
That's not crazy anymore. I'd say the craziest thing I ever saw in M&A is, we had a deal at the finish line, like literally getting ready to sign, probably within a day or two. Negotiated agreement, everything, and the founder of the company had second thoughts about valuation, and we basically said, you had plenty of time to talk to us about valuation when we were negotiating the LOI, and you didn't talk to us about it then. And we're not going back and talking about valuation now. And we walked away from the deal, and that was really painful for us. And because it was more of a tuck-in deal, so it wasn't a major impact for the company at all. But you know, um, the fact that someone would walk away from a deal after expending all that effort and all that time to basically get a deal all the way to the finish line to then question valuation, was crazy. Was crazy to me. And no surprise. A few months later, the person was reaching back out saying, "Are you still interested in doing that deal?" And the answer was no.
Wow.
So
That's so that they should have watched the tutorial, Negotiations 101, or read my book, one of the two.
exactly. Well, that's what I tell everybody. Read your book.
I appreciate it, Jeremy.
So
Thanks
yeah,
so much for the time today. I appreciate the great conversation and learned some good lessons here.
likewise. This was a lot of fun.
Hey, thank you for listening as well. Here's to the deal.
Thank you, and I look forward to that happy hour.
Absolutely.